The winter air over the Nix Hill lay heavy as hundreds of Athenian citizens pressed into the assembly space. It was 406 BCE, and the city had just triumphed at Arginusi against Sparta. Now the victors stood accused. No judge opened the proceedings, no magistrate framed the case. The people themselves, gathered as the sovereign demos, prepared to decide whether their own commanders would live or die. Voices clashed beneath the open sky. Politicians demanded punishment for the failure to rescue shipwrecked sailors after the battle, while others urged patience and separate trials for each general. Yet the crowd pushed toward a single, sweeping vote. In defiance of existing law, they agreed by acclamation to judge all the commanders together. When hands rose in a forest of arms, the mass decision condemned several of Athens' victorious leaders to death. Around the packed assembly space, the limits of this radical power became visible. Only adult male citizens could enter the crowd of decision-makers. Women remained in their homes or in nearby quarters. Enslaved people continued their labors, and resident foreigners moved through the city as traders and craftsmen, but none approached the Nix. Even many freeborn men lacked citizen status. The same democracy that executed its generals in one afternoon left most inhabitants voiceless. Late 6th century BCE Athens appeared tense and brittle. Aristocratic clans, the Eupatrids, dominated political life through lineage and private alliances. Old blood feuds resurfaced in street ambushes and night attacks, while decisions that shaped the city were struck in shadowed courtyards and inner rooms, not open assemblies. Families such as the Alcmaeonids loomed large, but ordinary Athenians had little say. Power remained a private inheritance rather than a public trust. A generation earlier, Solon's reforms had promised change. He had proclaimed the seisachtheia, the shaking off of burdens, canceling many debts and forbidding the enslavement of Athenians for what they owed. He then divided citizens into property classes, tying office holding to wealth instead of noble birth. Yet assemblies and courts still bent toward elite influence. The reforms softened crisis, but did not dissolve aristocratic dominance, nor did they create a democracy in the later sense. After the fall of the tyrant Hippias around 510 BCE, Athens plunged into renewed struggle. Rival nobles Isagoras and Cleisthenes vied for control, and the Spartan king Cleomenes marched in to support Isagoras. As he attempted to dissolve the council and expel opponents, citizens and councillors barricaded themselves on the Acropolis, besieging the Spartan-backed faction. In this volatile moment, Cleisthenes proposed a different path. New tribes based on residence, not kin, redefining the citizen body, and quietly, its exclusions. Between 508 and 462 BCE, the political architecture of Athenian democracy gradually took form. The Council of 500, or Boule, stood at its center. Chosen each year by lottery from adult male citizens, it prepared draft decrees, managed daily administration, and set the agenda for debate. This random selection weakened entrenched aristocratic families, spreading office holding more widely while still keeping it firmly inside the citizen body. The assembly, the ecclesia, met about 40 times a year on the Pnyx Hill. There, any eligible male citizen over 18 could, in theory, stand, address the crowd, and vote by a show of hands. Below this meeting place stretched a city of hundreds of thousands, yet only a minority climbed the slope. The open air, the stone speaker's platform, and the dense crowd turned public debate into the visible heart of Athenian power. The People's Court, the Heliaia, used huge juries of several hundred randomly chosen citizens to judge cases and scrutinize magistrates. Under Pericles, pay for jury service made participation possible for poorer men who could not afford to leave their work. Yet strict rules still applied. Free, male, of legitimate Athenian descent, and having completed military training. Demographic estimates suggested only tens of thousands qualified in a city approaching 300,000 inhabitants. Dawn light had risen over the Acropolis as the citizen joined the flow of men climbing toward the assembly on the Nix. He carried no invitation. His status as an adult male citizen already granted him entry into the people's gathering. On the hillside, he listened while heralds called for speeches on war, peace, and tribute. He could raise his hand to vote, shout assent or dissent, and even step forward to propose a decree. Below, in a crowded workshop quarter, his foreign-born neighbor bent over tools and raw materials. As a medic, he paid the metoikion tax and, when required, served in the army. Yet this same city barred him from the assembly and the council. He could not sit on juries, nor be chosen by lot for office. Profits from his craft enriched Athens, but without a special grant he remained unable to own land outright. In a nearby house, an Athenian woman managed the courtyard as the day unfolded. She oversaw grinding grain, weaving, and the care of children, while male relatives came and went toward the political center. However prosperous her household, she did not join them at the assembly, nor speak on her own behalf in court. Any legal contract or dispute passed through her Kyrios, a male guardian who embodied her absent civic voice. Athens had spoken of itself as a community of citizens, yet in the mid-5th century BCE it drew the circle of belonging tighter than ever. Around 451 to 450 BCE, under the influence of Pericles, the assembly approved a law that redefined who counted as Athenian. No longer was an Athenian father enough. From then on, a man needed both parents to be citizens to enter the deme registers and share in the city's political life. This rule soon revealed its human cost. During the Great Plague of the Peloponnesian War, Pericles lost his legitimate sons by his Athenian wife. His remaining surviving son had been born to Aspasia, a foreign woman from Miletus, and so fell outside the new law. To secure an heir, Pericles had to stand before the assembly and ask for an exception, exposing how even the city's leading statesmen could not casually evade the restrictions he championed. Lists and shards bore witness to these boundaries. Deme registers recorded who passed scrutiny, while dokimasia probed origins before men could speak or serve. Ostraka, inscribed with names, enabled citizens to banish fellow citizens by ostracism, never foreigners or slaves. Freed people almost never gained citizenship, and collective grants to foreign allies or benefactors remained rare and ceremonially marked. As Athenian citizenship grew more prized, the democracy guarded its ranks with sharpened suspicion. The camera moved away from the Knicks and into the shadowed spaces of Athenian life. Orators such as Demosthenes and Lysias, speaking centuries ago in crowded law courts, preserved the outlines of women's legal status. Their speeches described daughters passed in marriage by male guardians and households where women held only limited inheritance rights. In this democracy, a woman's property and person were managed through fathers, husbands, or sons, never through her own public voice. Archaeology and art filled in what the laws only hinted at. Vase paintings showed women bent over looms, drawing water at the fountain house, or supervising the inner spaces of the oikos. Excavations revealed spindle whorls, cooking pots, and modest quarters behind the street-facing rooms. Yet other images placed women in processions, bearing baskets and sacred objects. In scenes of the Panathenaia, they appeared at the heart of spectacle, woven into the rituals that defined the city. In religious life, women stepped briefly into civic visibility. At festivals such as the Thesmophoria, they gathered without men, guarding rites central to the community's fertility. During the Panathenaia, they presented Athena's new robe, symbolically clothing the city's patron. Still, they remained barred from the assembly and law courts, present only through male representatives. Legal disputes over dowries and inheritance exposed the paradox. Women shaped political outcomes while possessing no political rights of their own. The camera descended into the barren hills of Laurion, where archaeologists had uncovered narrow, airless mine shafts. Here, enslaved workers once labored by lamplight, hammering ore from the rock, breathing dust and fumes. The silver they raised had financed Athens's trireme fleets, jury pay, and grand construction projects. Above ground, slag heaps and ruined washing tables testified that the democratic city's political generosity depended on a hidden, coerced economy below. Back in the city, the lens moved through reconstructed workshops and households. In cramped industrial spaces, enslaved men and women had fired pottery, tanned leather, and produced armor. Inside affluent homes, they ground grain, fetched water from distant fountains, and tended citizen children. Some managed accounts or accompanied their owners in public. Yet the law denied them personhood. Harm done to them counted legally only as damage to property, not injury to an individual with rights. The focus shifted to metics, resident foreigners who filled the streets and ports of Athens. Coming from cities such as Corinth, Chios, or Thrace, they ran workshops, traded goods, and rode in the fleet. They paid special taxes and served in the army, but remained excluded from the assembly and the law court's juries. Figures like the speechwriter Lysias and the philosopher Aristotle shaped Athenian life, yet never joined its citizen body. Their labor underwrote the citizens' freedom to spend days debating in public. Athens entered the Peloponnesian War, proclaiming itself the champion of the people, yet its democracy rested on a narrow citizen body. When the plague struck in 430 BCE, it tore through cramped houses and barracks, killing rich and poor alike. Women, slaves, and resident foreigners tended the sick and handled the dead, exposed to constant danger. But in the public casualty lists, stonecutters inscribed only citizen names, turning shared suffering into unequal remembrance. As the war dragged on, Athens launched the vast Sicilian expedition in 415 BCE. The assembly, crowded with male citizens, debated strategy and listened to voices like Alcibiades and Nicias before voting to send the armada. On the triremes, however, rowers and fighters included medics and slaves alongside citizens. They endured storms, hunger, and desperate battles, yet they had no vote in the decisions that had hurled them across the sea into disaster. Defeat in Sicily in 413 BCE pushed Athens toward improvisation. The assembly briefly extended citizenship to some foreign allies and debated arming and freeing slaves as survival blurred old boundaries. Yet by 411 BCE, a small group of elites overturned pay for public service and imposed a council of 400, shrinking political rights. After the Spartan-backed 30 tyrants ruled through executions in 404 to 403 BCE, the restored democracy offered a general amnesty, but only among citizens, quietly preserving exclusions for women, slaves, and medics. Attention turned to the texts that had framed how later ages understood Athenian democracy. In the Politics, Aristotle described the citizen not as anyone living in the city, but as one who shared in judgment and in holding office. By definition, this excluded women, slaves, and most free non-citizens. Aristotle further argued that some people were natural slaves and assigned women a subordinate role within the household, outside formal civic life. Thucydides' version of the funeral oration attributed to Pericles offered a different, glowing portrait. Athens appeared as a city where citizens enjoyed equality before the law and advancement based on merit rather than birth. Yet the speech's very language revealed its limits. It spoke only of citizens, with no mention of women, resident foreigners, or enslaved laborers whose work sustained the city. Their absence testified to how unquestioned those exclusions had been. Later, Roman elites admired Athens as a school of culture and rhetoric, yet their own republic remained strongly oligarchic. Centuries afterward, early modern writers such as Montesquieu and 18th-century revolutionaries in France and North America read Greek and Latin accounts of Athens with fascination. They celebrated active citizenship and assemblies while often preserving or reshaping exclusion. Property tests, gender bars, and racial boundaries narrowed who counted as the people in their new democracies. As the sun had set over the Pnyx, the Athenian assembly still offered a sharp contrast to modern politics. Here, citizens had voted directly on decrees, war, and laws with a show of hands, gathered in one place on one day. Modern parliaments, spread across vast states, usually relied on representative democracy instead. Elected officials debated and decided, while millions of voters only intervened periodically at the ballot box. Yet the most striking difference lay in who had been allowed to vote. In classical Athens, perhaps only 10 to 20% of inhabitants, adult freeborn males with citizen parents, had belonged to the assembly. Women, enslaved people, resident foreigners, and many others remained excluded. Early modern democracies echoed this pattern. Revolutionary France and the young United States barred women from voting, restricted the franchise by property or taxes, and excluded enslaved and colonized populations. Over the 19th and 20th centuries, struggles for universal adult suffrage gradually expanded the electorate to include women, racial minorities, and naturalized immigrants in many states, though often only after conflict and resistance. The memory of the condemned generals of Arginusai recalled how even a narrow citizen body could wield democracy with devastating force. From Athens to the present, the ideal of rule by the people had remained shadowed by arguments over who counted as the people.